The CDG report from 2007 that Sanjeev refers to actually said, they actually did also look at a smaller sampling of those same 16 studies, but they did say, we find no justification in the literature for inflation targets as low as the IMF has been pushing. They also said something on fiscal policy, this CDG report from 2007. It said, we don't think the IMF has been flexible enough in helping developing countries consider other reasonable but more expansionary fiscal options. Okay, so those on monetary and fiscal, that's what the CDG in 2007 report said. The 2004 IEO report Sanjeev refers to was an IEO report done in-house here at IMF, and but it was comparing and contrasting PRGF deficit reduction targets with earlier ESAF loans, IMF loans from an earlier period. But the earlier period really started in the early 90s, like 93, 95, and went forward. And so, but the problem with that approach is that the big deficit reductions had already happened, as Brooke and Aldo referred to, under the original stabilization loans in the 80s. So by the early 90s, deficits were already low. So by comparing already lower deficit targets with more recently low deficit reduction targets, it's not really showing you a whole lot. Of course, they conclude, oh, no difference in IMF policy. But what they should have done is started in the early 1980s and gone up to the present time. That would have given you an important contrast to show how deficits used to be approached and how deficits have been approached under structural adjustment and subsequently. So again, I would just draw questions to that methodology. As Brooke says, we can do this all day with studies. But just get back to, I think some of the criticisms are again off base. Yes, the IMF has taken steps to say we're going to preserve or constrain, further cuts in social spending, and in fact, we're even advocating increases in some social spending. But those pale in comparison to what's needed, as Brooke says. And again, the recurrent budget and how much is in the recurrent budget is not really my point. My main point is that the tax base isn't growing in many of these countries. My colleague Terry McKinley in University of London, he's also done studies recently on how some countries have done a lot to increase their tax revenue collection in recent years, especially work in LDCs. They've done a lot to increase the tax take. But those efforts are starting to bottom out. They've been increasing the tax base, but not by that much, and it seems to be leveling out. The real thing gets back to why can't those countries, the domestic companies, expand production and employment and contribute to that tax base increasingly over time? I haven't heard that answered yet. And so a lot of people, there's a lot here to respond to. Just external financing is bigger. That's great, but that's not the point. Our country's going to be dependent on foreign aid for forever. It's just not a development strategy. Show me how and where and when the tax base is going to get bigger. There's going to be more domestically owned companies in the formal sector. How that economy is diversifying over time. How countries are moving out of primary ag and extractives and moving into manufacturing and services and moving up the technological ladder over time. Show me that. That's what I would say is a successfully developing country. Increasing employment, diversification of the economy, increasing the sophistication of the value added of the things that are produced. All right, more domestic companies than there used to be, more in the formal sector contributing to the tax base, employees, payroll taxes contributing to the tax base. Show me those things in a developing country. I would say that's a successfully developing country. I just don't see it in too many places. There's a lot here to respond to. I don't really have time for all, but maybe we can get back to some of your questions.
Thank you, Rick. Sanjeev,
see, Rick is doing the same thing that he's blaming me for, which is to pick up selectively, criticizing others, but not criticizing his own methodology, which actually his new methodology is just a bunch of views in many ways. So the point here is that, let me pick up some of the issues which were made by Peter as well as by you. Peter, first of all, let me reassure you that most of my colleagues, virtually all of them who work on countries, they do believe in increasing spending on health and education sector and infrastructure, broadly defined. They would love to have some more health sector workers. And there's nothing that the fund staff does to prevent that from happening. But the issue really is, how do you ensure sustainable financing for all these things? something which Peter alluded to. You need to have financing which is there for a period of time, which is not going to lead to unsustainable debt position. And so that is the critical point. And secondly, you were complaining that higher inflows from foreign sources led to displacement of budgetary resources. Now, what is happening actually is, when you talk to the ministers, is that when they see health sector somehow has received a lot of money from the donors, they have started to cut down on their own internal allocations because they want money is fungible. They need to provide resources from other sectors. Health is not the only priority for them. They have education, they have sanitation, they have rural roads, and so on and so forth. So it's good that you are advocating for health sector. I think it's we applaud you for all that. It's an excellent thing that is going on, and a lot of resources were raised as a result of this. But the policymakers have a lot of different priority areas that they need to allocate resources. When they see foreign money coming in for the health sector, they then start diverting resources to other sectors. And this is a rational behavior on their part. Of course, we may not like it because it doesn't lead to additionality. I agree with you. That's a problem. But money is fungible. We have to accept that money is fungible, and this kind of behavior is, in some sense, a rational behavior in part of some ministers, because they have to deal not only with health but with many other sectors. Taking up the broader issue that Rick raised on that the relaxation in the fiscal targets that we saw in the food and fuel crisis and also in the financial crisis is not permanent. What you have to keep in mind is the following. Again, going by what Peter said, he talked about sustainable financial policies. The countries that had good policies in the past got debt relief, they had fiscal space, they expanded during the crisis. So they were able to adopt counter-cyclical fiscal policies. And that is a very good thing. And so you have, in the food and fuel crisis, and to correct you on that, the inflation targets and the fiscal targets became the program targets. They were expanded. So they were not, as the situation evolved, the program targets were adapted to the changing situation. So there was nothing, of course, we could not anticipate this crisis. If we had anticipated the crisis, we would have, of course, built that into it. Not only that, we also provided financing along with that relaxation of targets. A lot of financing for both food and fuel prices, and very rapid financing. So there is that case where you have relaxation of targets. Now, you are saying this may not happen down the line. Now, if the countries finance these additional deficits or higher deficits by borrowing domestically, because foreign aid was not coming in, that means they built up a lot of debt.